Hotep, and welcome to Matters of Diversity with Dr. B. Today, we are still celebrating the phenomenal Black History Month. And we are going to have an opportunity today to talk with one of my colleagues, one of my pals, one of my friends from years gone by, who is gracing us with his presence today to talk about the things that he knows about, especially when it comes to history. And so a lot of knowledge is going to be dropped today with regards to how we as a culture have kind of created the Black experience. And so I'm going to be bringing on Dr. Jeffrey Obana Green Ogbar, and he is a professor of history at the University of Connecticut. And from 2003 to 2009, he served as director of the Africana Studies Institute. He served as Associate Dean for Humanities in College of Liberal Arts and Sciences from 2009 to 2012. In June of 2012, he was named the university's Vice Provost for Diversity. And so we'll get a chance to talk about that as well, because our roles kind of collide a little bit when it comes to that. In 2014, he became a founding director of the Center for the Study of Popular Music. And we're going to focus a lot of our time today on music because he's a genius when it comes to talking about the history of rap music. And so I'm excited about what he's going to bring to you all today. Professor Ogbar is the author and editor of several books, including Black Power, Radical Politics and African American Identity, Hip Hop Revolution, the Culture and Politics of Rap. That's one we're going to hit hard today. And the Harlem Renaissance Revisited, Politics, Arts, and Letters. And so if you all would please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeffrey Ogbar. Sir, how are you?
Hey, doing well, doing well. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for bringing me in down to warm Central Florida right now.
Yes,
England,
yes.
Is outside. I can take my my camera and show you my.
You don't have to. I kind of freak out when I see snow these days. It's part of not my existence anymore. I remember those days well, very fondly, from the time we were stomping around in the snow up in the University of Connecticut in stores there, where you.
Yeah. I think we both had hair on our heads back then. Yeah.
I did have a little bit of hair. I was maybe sparsing a little bit up top, but it was definitely a little something. And I see we decided to go with the beard these days.
Yeah, it just kind of migrated down, man. I just just kind of slowly saw it working its way down,
I have to laugh at that because the other day I had said something very similar to that. The fact that it didn't want to stay up here, but it kind of came in full down here, right?
Yeah, it worked out,
So how's things been? How are you and how's life? All these years later. I mean, we were together. I left Connecticut area in 1999. So that's really the last time we worked together in a physical capacity, but we've known each other over the years. So yeah. I mean, how's life been and what's going on for you?
Yeah, so it's funny that we were physically at UConn for 2 years. It seems longer, I guess, because we hung out and had friends and all that kind of stuff. And so I came in '97, and married, kids now. I have little Jeffrey, Asa, and Hazel Ann, daughter and son. So
I know that. Wow.
Life, I'm happy everyone's healthy and safe, and here we are.
So what was it like having your son? Because your daughter was first, right?
The boy was first, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it was, like you, I was kind of late in the game, so I had a lot of friends who had kids and everything. And so it's been interesting to see it from afar than to see it up close. And it's just such a blessing. And you thank God for their health. And,
yeah.
And he's just a wonderful, beautiful little boy. And the girl is just I would call her my perfect baby. She's just
excellent. She's
my angel. So I have no complaints. I give thanks all the time for them.
Yeah, I hear you. I know exactly where you're coming from with that. So when you think about all I mean, from a perspective of a history professor, from a perspective of understanding all the things that have happened in Black and brown communities for decades, for years, going back to slavery and before, what's it like raising a child in this type of environment? When you think about what's happened over the course of 2020.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. I was just today in my lunch break watching HBO Real Sports with Brian Gumbel, and they had a segment on a football coach in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, who was he's training and working with kids, but also he's a police officer. He's a black man, and he was talking about the challenges during the summer of 2020 and after George Floyd's murder by these police. And when the segment came on, our children were in the room, and my wife didn't want them to see it, and so she wanted us to watch that later when they were around. She doesn't want them to see these sort of images at such a young age. And so you asked this question right at the right time, and these are issues we're grappling with, because our children, my children, are very young, and in general, she doesn't want them to see violence, even like, fictional violence depicted on TV.
Right.
She doesn't want them just to have those images inundated in their lives at this point. So when we think about what it's like, raising children in these spaces, I think the best advice I have is, like with any child, you want to envelop them in love and affirmation and kindness and inspire them to be the best person they could possibly be. And to that end, we know that exposing them to toxic ideas, toxic images, those things are also part of the equation. And what those toxic images and ideas are, they don't always have to be tied to violence, right? I mean, just being in a world that will denigrate or dehumanize, them, or say that they're, less worthy, it's like providing a protective cocoon, if you will, around, the sort of forces they'll have to experience in life. And, I think about my own upbringing. I think about pluses and minuses and what I experienced. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles mostly.
Right.
So I grew up in one of the largest just homogeneously black communities too, like almost all African American. So I grew up in a very large black community. I was born in the South Side of Chicago, but raised in California, first grade through high school in California. So I was raised in like these super black spaces, and then went to undergrad in Atlanta, another super black space, and at Morehouse College, virtually all black school. So I was like in super black spaces until I got to graduate school. And in those spaces, I think it's very different than coming up in spaces. And also my high school is very diverse, although nobody was a majority at our high school. It was a pretty big high school. And, I'm very appreciative of my experience in many ways, and that a lot of people who are my age tell stories of coming out of communities where they got called the N-word, or they went places where people were uncivilized and, barbaric, and had to deal with, uncivilized, hateful people who expressed their anger and hatred at them. And I thank God that wasn't my experience. And I kind of wonder what my sense of worth would have been had I been going to the park as a kid and hearing, hateful things from little savages, right? Like little barbarians who were parroting what their uncivilized, ignorant parents may have been saying. And that's something that I didn't have to deal with. And I don't want my children to deal with that.
Right.
And, but, I went to, this is a situation that I can't apply to my kids. They're good and bad from my experience, my particular experience. And I also grew up in the neighborhood that had other challenges, not just, that kind of thing. I had other issues as well. So, I think about those things all the time, and I don't have all the answers, but I do the best I can to provide this sort of protective space around the children. I think that's what every parent should want to do,
Exactly. I appreciate that. I think I hear you in my soul based on what you're talking about, because I think, my wife is the same way when it comes to how we raise our daughter, and the things that I might not think about that come on the screen. She's like, give me that look, right? That, let's move them out of the room, or let's do something along those lines. So your experience thinking about that, right? Chicago to LA to Atlanta to stores. What was that like? I mean, what was that like for you? Because I can imagine meeting a brother like me after you have gone through all those other experiences. It might have been a little different.
Well, the thing is that I went from Atlanta to Bloomington, Indiana for graduate school. So Bloomington was probably demographically one of the biggest inverses you can get from my undergrad, right? So I went to a small, private, all-male, mostly black school in a large city that was mostly black, to a large co-ed state school in a small town that was white and a mostly white town. So it was like the inverse all down the line.
It was just like,
And yeah, and so it was some culture shock going to Bloomington. I mean, they didn't have a simple things I never took for granted, like a black radio station. And this is back in the early '90s when R&B and hip hop just started to become more common in white radio. But you know, I would just turn on the radio, and you know, you didn't have just simple things. There was no black barbershop in Bloomington, right? So we would have to go to Indianapolis, an hour away, about 45 minutes away to get a barbershop. So Bloomington was in some ways it was a culture shock that prepared me for what I might experience in stores. But what was a bigger culture shock was my 1 year I spent on a fellowship at St. Lawrence University right before I got to stores, and that was upstate New York, and a little town about 2,000 people, small little
okay,
village at a small. Well, I don't know how many people in the town. The university had about 2,000 people, and the small town where the nearest airport was 2.5 hours south. And when you're like 2.5 hours north of Syracuse, you get an idea how far up north we were
yeah,
next to the Canadian border.
yes,
So that was when I came to Manchester, Connecticut, and I saw this huge mall. It was like being in New York City. I was like, yo, they got like a Target, you know. And so, in fact, they didn't have a Target yet in Manchester. They actually had they had like a
Caldor, was
Walmart.
it?
Yeah, because the Target didn't come to a few years later. So, but
Yeah,
when I
I
got to
think
Manchester,
Caldor and
yeah,
Zayres, was that stuff Kmart?
Caldor, yeah. They had. I remember they had a Caldor. They had. They didn't have a Circuit City. They had a. What's the other one? That
I think it was Circuit City because Circuit City broke down and it became Best. Then Best Buy kind of took over. We didn't
And it
have
was
because
just like
upstate New York had H.G. Craig or something like that. But
yeah,
our electronics store was Circuit City.
yeah.
It
It just
was,
was.
and then they
It was
broke. Then they
very.
went.
Yeah, but you know, when I got here, in some ways, because I had such deprivation in Canton, New York, the deprivation I experienced there made stores was like Canton, but stores was near stuff, right? Stores was
Okay.
near Manchester. It was near
Yeah.
you were 30 minutes away from Hartford. You know, from there you could go to New Haven, and of course New York and Boston. And so in the 2.5 hour radius of Canton, you had you had Syracuse, right? But here we have so many more cities, and just
Yeah.
made I felt like I was closer to civilization once I
Yeah.
came here. So
So that's a funny thing because most people, especially from the Black community, think that there's no Black people in Connecticut. They think Connecticut is this thing, and actually, the places you just described are much less diverse than what Connecticut had to offer.
in fact, I like to tell. I'm glad you raised that because I explain to people that of 50 states, Illinois is the only other state that is more representative of the country demographically than Connecticut. Connecticut is very. It looks like the United States in ways that other states do not.
Oh,
So you
well.
have states like California, which skews Latino, and Texas, right? You have
Yeah.
states like Georgia, which skew African American. But in terms of a state that is demographically more like the country itself, there's Illinois, there's Connecticut, and so Connecticut has a sort of demographics that sort of look like the United States,
Yeah.
just ethnically and racially speaking, right? But economically, it's a little more affluent than
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So you made mention to the fact that rap music came into your life somewhere in and about maybe the 80s and 90s, and how you were infiltrated into that society. And then, one of the things that I know about you is that music hits you hard. I mean, you know that music backwards and forward. And anybody in the room with less knowledge kind of has to kind of just be quiet and just give reverence to your knowledge of hip hop and rap music. There's a saying that people say from I think I don't know what is it. What's the movie that had Lorenz Tate and Neil Long?
Love Jones.
Was it Love Jones that they talk about? Oh, no. This was the one with Sanaa Lathan when she said she loved hip hop or whatever it was.
Brown Sugar.
Brown Sugar, right? And then, what made you fall in love with hip hop?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
That's a great
so
movie.
how did
By
you
the
get
way.
there?
How did I get there? Yeah. Well, I definitely have been in rooms with people who know a lot more than I do, and I'm humbled by it.
Well, I'm talking
I
about from
do.
my perspective.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
I'm still kind of rough around the edges when it comes to rap music.
yeah. No, it's certainly a passion and a bigger passion at certain points in my life, But for me, and most people my generation, so I'm born the same year as Jay-Z, Diddy, and Ice Cube, right? And so, one year younger than Will Smith and LL Cool J, and like 1 year older than, Q-Tip. So you get an idea like where I am, like 2 years older than Tupac, 2 years older than, or 2 or 3 years older than Eminem. So I'm kind of right in that get an idea of where I am in
Right,
age
right, right,
wise.
right, right.
And so, when I was raised in LA, when we got hip hop, it was we didn't get all four elements. And hip hop, for your viewers, is composed of four elements that came together in the early 1970s in the Bronx organically in the African American, Puerto Rican, and also some Anglophone Caribbean communities. So we have the DJ front and center, and the DJ who mixes and eventually would backspin and scratch and all that, but just the DJ who will host the parties. You have the MC or rapper, who of course we all know the rapper does, and then they have the b-boy or b-girl who break dances, right? This backspinning, windmills, and all that kind of stuff. So you have these three musical elements that come together, and
Right.
there's a fourth element that actually emerged outside of the African American Puerto Rican community, and that was graffiti art, a certain style of graffiti art that
Yeah.
started to emerge in New York City in the early 1970s. It was practiced by largely young men, white, black, Latino, middle class, working class, poor, sort of across class spectrums and races. They were doing graffiti art. But this graffiti art later got fused to the three elements that were musical. And then they kind of come to the world as hip hop by the mid 1970s. They're kind of, and then certainly by the late 70s, the graffiti art is seen as tied to hip hop for sure, right?
Okay.
But initially, you have graffiti artists, you have dudes from Brooklyn who are, white kids who have no affinity to rap music at all and don't like the people who created rap music, right? And they have nothing to do with, they're graffiti artists, but they're like listening to, rock and roll and stuff like that. So it later becomes part of it. And people, the history is that, they're all together all the whole time, but it kind of comes together later. So you have the four elements of hip hop. So when hip hop really leaves New York, people aren't getting all four elements organically presented to you in this nice package because this is not it's not commodified. It comes organically from the community of the most marginalized parts of the community. So you're looking
Right.
at of the five boroughs in New York City in the early 1970s, the Bronx is the poorest borough, and the South Bronx is the poorest section of the poorest borough. In fact, at one point, that part of the South Bronx was the poorest census tract in the entire United States of America. So looking at New York City, we all know how expensive it is to live in New York City now. But at that point, this was the poorest section of the entire country. And out of this place, you have hip hop. And when it came out, you didn't have radio stations, you didn't have magazines, you didn't have movies, you didn't have record labels giving any attention to these folks. There were no full length albums in all of the 1970s, and so you just had songs and some of the first tracks. The first track that went popular was Rapper's Delight in 1979. And so
Right.
at the time, I was 9, 10 years old, and when it came out, like other kids, I loved it. And I'm in LA, and we had pop locking that emerged in the West Coast. So pop locking was there, but we didn't have breakdancing. We didn't have people spinning on the ground. Graffiti art that existed in LA was not like hip hop graffiti art. It was a gangster sort of different graffiti. It's completely separate from hip hop. And so the first element I saw was and heard and was familiar with was the rapper. If you listen to Rappers Delight, there's no scratching, there's no mixing, there's no backspinning. You don't have that sort of element. So the DJ's skill set isn't even demonstrated. So all you have is the rap, and that's what many of us outside of the tri-state area first experience when it came to hip hop. And that was my thing. And then as time went on, movies came out in the early 1980s. There's a movie called Wild Style, which came out in '82, and then Style Wars, a documentary, and both of those featured all four elements in the early '80s. And you and I remember Beat Street, Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, rest in peace, Electric Boogaloo. And so we have these movies that came out that actually showcase all four elements. And I was like a lot of kids, I tried my hand at rapping, right? I was whack. I tried my hand to trying to be a b-boy. I was whack, right? I never even tried to be a DJ, but I bet I would have been whack as well. But I became a graffiti artist, and even then, I didn't do big pieces or big bombs, we call them. I was a tagger, so that was the one thing I did in terms of being a practitioner of the art form.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I had a little small crew out in LA, and we hit up walls and buses and stuff like that. But that was my involvement with hip hop. And years later, of course, things worked out where UConn today actually has the longest taught class, the oldest taught class on hip hop at any university in the United States of America. And the classes on hip hop are taught everywhere. There's hip hop.
And you established that class.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And I remember that because I think if I remember correctly, you got some pushback.
No, actually, my department, everyone was really great about it. Actually, my department was really good. It was the academic year, so you were probably just heading out. It was 99, 2000 academic year. And
okay.
This is an interesting story because it's like fate would have it that it kind of worked this way. Where in the fall of '99, I was set up to teach a graduate course. And I'm still an assistant professor, no books out, no one knows who I am, and grad students were uninterested in taking my class. I had such a low enrollment they had to cancel the class, and I was bummed out in the department.
Was that because of who you were as a Black male, or people didn't identify with you as a history professor? What do you think was the cause of those low enrollments?
I think I don't know exactly all the reasons. I could just say that my reason always has been that I was an assistant professor without much. Again, I didn't have anything published, and perhaps there was just perhaps competing grad courses. Students didn't want to, they were like this random dude, and I don't know. I know that subsequently, I don't have a problem with having students in my classes now, but back then, this is what it was, and I was only my second year at the university. And so, I'm second year out, I'm young and whatever. So I didn't have enough students. So I owed the department a class for spring of 20. And the department head said, Jeff, I know this is not what you want to hear, but you have to teach in a class next semester because you have a 2-2 low. So you'll be teaching 3 classes instead of 2. And I thought that sounded a little sketchy, but I did understand that this other class didn't take. So I did owe the department a class. So, I'll make it easy for you. You can teach a special topics course and just come up with a topic that you would like to teach. And I was like, all right, how about exploring this topic on hip hop? I did a first year experience, 1 credit class on it, and that was a lot of fun. Let me expand it to a 3 credit class. It was one of the most enjoyable classes for years in my life. I mean, from that point forward, I had some of the most amazing students. They were incredibly diverse, really passionate. It was fun for me. The literature and the scholarship on hip hop at the time was very, very thin. So I was actually using articles from like The Source and Vibe. I was photocopying stuff and putting them in the library and digitizing, articles from the press. And there were some academic books, but some of them were super theoretical and dense. But it was such a nice time. And it was so rare that The Source actually, UConn sent a media release about this unusual topic.
Yeah.
And The Source, which at the time was had the largest circulation of any music-oriented magazine, they did an article on it. They sent a photographer up to stores, took a picture of me. So the September 2000 issue of The Source has me with a head of hair, next to a lectern with a big UC next to it.
Do you have an article? You have it close by? You have that picture close by?
It is actually in here. I might be able to find it before we finish.
All right. Yeah. I'm not going to mess with you in that regard. So, we should have worked that out earlier.
That would have been great.
So I want to go back to the beginning of rap and hip hop and how people can kind of get to know the genre, because it has a historical context to it when it comes to spoken word, jazz, and especially when you start thinking about the contemporary jazz. You found the picture, didn't you?
All right, so I might actually have it.
All right.
I think I do.
All right.
It's your boy LL Cool J on the cover. See that?
Yeah, yeah.
And oh man, I got two of the things. I don't actually have the picture. The picture's not even in here, man. I thought I had it.
It's got to
So
be.
I'll keep looking for it though. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. So the genre of hip hop, when it took off, it was necessarily it was one of those things that people frowned upon, right? It was either you loved it or you hated it, with regards to that. But the people who were on the side of not liking it were the people who were like, "What is this? They're just playing some music from some artist who created some music, and now they're just sampling and then just moving forward." They didn't understand the artistry behind it. So can you kind of talk a little bit about how it got its beginnings and why it's so popular today?
Yeah, you raised a really good point about how there are people who disregarded hip hop when it initially emerged. And it's interesting because the people who hated hip hop when it first emerged or were very critical of it, excuse me, were not critical because it was vulgar and misogynistic or anti-black or anti-social. In fact, hip hop when it first began, it didn't, popular hip hop did not curse. They didn't call women derogatory names. It like any black expression. So if you look at all of black music before gangster rap, like from Marvin Gaye to Stevie Wonder, Luther Vandross, Bobby Brown, Sam Cooke, you go keep going back, and people were not, Billy Eckstine, people weren't calling women B's and H's. This is alien to black musical expression. This is not what African Americans did. And so the music came out, it was completely topically in line with black art. And it was festive, it was party music, a little less than most of what we saw. It was, at least in terms of R&B, didn't focus so much on love ballads, but kind of like funk music, it had a center around partying and having a good time. It was escapist music. And like funk music, it partied, but it was separate topically in a very substantial way, in that it was centered on the tropes of self-aggrandizement. And it really kind of took a topical line of heredity from Muhammad Ali. And so Muhammad Ali, when hip hop emerged, there was no black person on planet Earth more popular than Muhammad Ali. And there's probably no little boy who paid any attention to what was going on in the world who didn't like Muhammad Ali. If you were a little black, I'm sure you like Muhammad Ali. I've never known a black person, I've never known a black boy my age or a little older, a little younger, who was familiar with Muhammad Ali, who didn't think Muhammad Ali was the man, right? And so Muhammad Ali rhymed, he was witty, he was charismatic, he bragged, and he was very good at what he did. And rapping grew out of that tradition. And it was distinct from the R&B focus. Muhammad Ali talked about his name. He said, "What's my name?" So when you listen to Run DMC, they say their name. You hear Run DMC talk about that. Rakim, I'm the Raikim. And so you hear Rakim talk about his name. You hear Nas, you hear Jay-Z, Jigga, Hova. You have whole songs about someone's name. Like, the self-aggrandizement tradition of Muhammad Ali came through in hip hop. And so when people were attacking hip hop, they were attacking hip hop much in the way people attack jazz music. And that musically, it was such a departure from how people understood music being created that and also you can't deny the fact that it came from a certain segment of the society that people were used to beating up on, right?
Yes.
So, jazz music comes out of the black community. Blues music comes out of the black community. Ragtime music comes out of the black community. Rock and roll comes out of the black community. All these genres of music, when they came about, they had people attacking it, saying it was a threat, it was barbaric. And because they were not beholden to feeling that they couldn't openly be racist, they called it N-word music, but weren't polite enough to even call it N-word music.
It made them uncomfortable. They couldn't dance to it. They couldn't move to it. So they couldn't understand the rhythmic passion of it.
Well, I actually don't even give them that. I don't even give them that. I don't say there was an issue with them not being able to dance to it. It was just that they, in every other facet of their lives, they were hateful, right? So whether they could dance to it or not, they were hateful anyway. And so it could have been anything. They didn't want a black person to play basketball. They didn't want a black person to attend, University of Alabama. So if you're not going to allow someone to even play golf or enter a restaurant, you're not gonna like anything they do, right? And so the fact that it came out from the Black community just sort of made racists angry that so many young white kids loved it so much, right? And so when white kids gravitated to jazz, this is a fundamental cultural threat in a world that says that Black people can't create anything, that Black people have no creative bone in their body, but you create every genre of popular music in the United States. You insist, you argue, you create all these institutions saying that white people are superior, but you can't create a popular form of music, right? Everything you do and your kids love comes from Black folks, right? And so
you definitely can't get a Grammy for it.
I suspect the gatekeepers of white supremacy in the cultural world were quite threatened.
Nice.
There's a very pronounced insecurity when you come to racism, right? Like racism is sort of, it's first off is non-scientific. Race is not scientific. It's make believe. Human beings are humans, and so I think on a fundamental level, there are a lot of people who understand that, and so they insist with all this effort to prevent fair competition, right? So if they fully believed in their own racial politics, they could say, hey, you know what? Black people are so inferior that we can let you compete with us in baseball and we will always win because you're inferior. You can compete with us in school. We'll give you equal funding and let you come to our schools, and we'll let you have all the same resources because we know that, and I'll let you have all these things because I know that you will always lose. But in fact, you do everything in power to prevent a fair competition because you fully understand that what you believe is some BS, right? And so when you look at, and someone said this before about music, is that you can segregate everything in society, but when the airwaves in Birmingham, Alabama play Little Richard, the airwaves were not segregated. And so in little white bedrooms or big white bedrooms, white people, their children could hear Little Richard, no matter how much their parents didn't want them to hear Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Fats Domino. Rock and roll came to their bedrooms, right? And so you have these people attack it. So when you jump forward now to hip hop, the interesting thing is that the initial attacks at hip hop came from Black people. And, there's a guy who I saw in a conference. He didn't like me asking this question, and he felt some kind of way. But a great musician, songwriter, composer named James Ntume. And James Ntume, among many people, of course, he did Juicy. And James Ntume said that what you have, and this was around 88, he got on the radio in New York and said that this is the first generation of African Americans not to extend the boundaries of creativity in music, that rap music is essentially Memorex music. He said that
I remember that.
You take someone like Greg Tate, a writer, and if he takes a paragraph of James Baldwin's writing and passes it off as his own, that's plagiarism. He said these people who are sampling, this is plagiarism, this is unoriginal, this is lazy, and he attacked rap music along these lines. That's what a lot of people did initially. There's a group called Sesasonic that had a song called Talking All That Jazz, directly attacking James Ntume and responding to his radio sort of, I don't call it a rant, but his criticism of hip hop on the radio. And so what you have though is, I think, just like jazz, people who are often afraid of something entirely new, and they are sort of struck by this level of creativity and brilliance that they just don't expect to come from these Black and brown boys and to some extent girls in the poorest sections of our country. And with every single obstacle that you can imagine.
Who were speaking their truth. Who were speaking their truth.
Yeah. I mean, and early on it was party music, but eventually, and this is also an important point. I ask my students this, and I say, hey, let's talk about Black artists, musical artists in the 1980s. And so to your point, Kent, about speaking the truth, I ask my students, I say, I'll actually write this on the board. I'll say, give me some Black musical artists who are non-hip hop in the 1980s. And they'll have like, Luther Vandross, Anita Baker, Whitney Houston, New Edition, Ready for the World, all these things, right? I'll write them all down. And I'll say, I love all these artists. This is great. And then I'll say, what were the social, political, economic conditions of Black communities like in the 1980s? And then they'll talk about, crime, the drug trade, unemployment, police brutality, all these things. I'll say, how many Black artists on radio were talking about any of those things. The only ones who were talking about those things, except for one line of Sign of the Times by Prince, everyone else was talking about partying, love, escapism, which is fine. I love Anita Baker and all that stuff, right? But the only ones, to your point, speaking the truth, and ones speaking truth to power, talking about the conditions in the Black community, were rappers.
Right.
When you had 8 million lives, you had people who were talking about white lines.
Yep.
You had people talking about drug trade, mass incarceration. People were talking about these things before social scientists and academics in the ivory tower were writing entire books on these issues. They were talking about ban the box, right? The felony line on your job application. In 1994, Ice Cube has a line making reference to that. They're talking about 3 strikes. They're talking about the mandatory minimums. They're talking about all these different things years before social scientists create a vast corpus of research on this, right? And hip hop artists were doing that. And I ask my students, I'll say, give me some facet of the prison industrial complex, any part of it, whether we're talking about from police stops to convictions, the trial, the sentencing, intake in prison, being in prison, coming out of prison, and being on probation. You could create 8 steps, and every single step is in some hip hop song, giving you a first person analysis of what that is like. That prison has been so traumatized as a Black community that rappers have engaged it in every single way with such sagacity and such aplomb. And R&B, I like New Edition, I like, Luther Vandross, but they weren't talking about that kind of stuff. And so you're right. They were talking their experience and truth to power in a way that nobody was doing.
So let's go with that, because then there's various forms of hip hop and rap in terms of lyrics and the way that people flow and things along those lines. There's a gift that's involved with that. That's why when people do these types of things, you can tell the difference between an Eric B and Eminem and all those other individuals who are out there. You can tell the difference in terms of their lyrical style or their flow or however you classify that. How does one learn to interpret? Because that was the main thing, right? Because we could all do hip hop to the hip to the hip to the hip hop, we can do all that, right? But when it came to having an actual, these people were doing this and they were finding their rhythm, they were finding their style of music, of how they would kind of share their gift, their words. There's a method to that, and there's no 2 rappers that are alike, so to speak. They may sound similar, but there's something in their sound that's different. Can you talk to that? Is there something that is germane to hip hop that we don't necessarily know about because of that?
Yeah, so I would say rappers have developed distinct patterns of how they deliver their rhymes. And you can see how rappers have evolved over time. So if you take an MC like you said Jermaine, what made me think of J. Cole, right? So his real name is Jermaine. So if you listen to an early J. Cole song and you hear early J. Cole when he's rapping and he's still in college, his delivery is different than it would be later. And you can hear people who often reflect the influences they may have had from their favorite rapper, and they have not quite gotten their own sound yet. Right. And you have MCs that are quite distinct once they get in their lane, once they mature as artists. Right. And there's incredible sort of work that goes into creating your own distinct style of delivery, the rhyme scheme, and there are rappers. Yep.
And East Coast, West Coast kind of a style too, right?
That was certainly much more pronounced, certainly in the 1990s, and not just because you had so this rivalry, but the production sound was very different in the East Coast, West Coast back then, and you have the production, the sonic, the aesthetics of the music just were very different largely very different East Coast and West Coast. But you're right, also the ways in which lyrics were delivered were different. And I will say this as an Angelino, that New Yorkers tended to have and continue to have more complex rhyme schemes. And you do have people like Kendrick Lamar, who's from the LA areas, from Compton. And Kendrick is arguably the best MC out right now. Like he's brilliant. He's gotten all sorts of awards. He's gotten praise from every corner of the hip hop nation, if you will. And Kendrick is one of my favorite MCs. He's brilliant. His use of simile, of metaphor, internal rhyme schemes, metonyms, puns, intertextual allusions, like he does so much so well. And his topical sort of space is vast. He's very discursive. So he's such a brilliant MC. And certainly back in the day, if you take someone like Tupac, right, from the West Coast, although he was born on the East Coast, Tupac, his complexity of rhyme scheme was nothing like the complexity you had in someone like Biggie, right? And so Biggie didn't have the vast topical range that Tupac had. Tupac could talk about so many more things, but his lyrical complexity wasn't as rich as Biggie's was. The lyrical complexity of Kendrick Lamar, I mean, he's vast in what he talks about, and the depth at which he talks about things. I mean, he has like layers upon things, and he has a visual text in his videos that amazing. And then he has sort of like subtext in his lyrics. So when you hear a line, it's not just what you're hearing. You're hearing a line that you can deconstruct and get something else from it. And then he has great complexity. So all that's to say that there's some regional difference. The South in particular, like Southern rappers, you take Migos. You're doing some really good Southern rappers. Of course, Andre 3000. People talk about him. People talk about Scarface.
Yeah.
From Houston, Andre 3000 from Atlanta. You have J. Cole's from North Carolina.
Like it's hot, brother.
Yeah. I mean, you have a lot of people. You have talent everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But you have these regional differences. You're right on the money. And then the regional accents also come through, which I found that some of my students were unaware. They could hear Rakim, and I had students who would hear Rakim with his thick New York accent.
Yeah.
Think he was from LA, which I could not imagine. That sounds bizarre to me, but.
So how do we move away from the brilliance of what they're bringing? Because there's interpretations of what they say, first of all, and how people see that and hear that. But then you watch some young people who are just listening to the beats and just moving to the beats. They know the songs, but are they really paying attention to the content? So how do we learn to listen for the messages that are being said in there, as opposed to getting caught up in the beat?
Yeah. So I have to say to people who are not that familiar with hip hop is that hip hop is it's like a large city, right? Where you have neighborhoods that are nice and neighborhoods that are not so nice. You have places where you can go and hang out, and you'll find great coffee shops and wonderful restaurants and great bookstores, and places where you go and buy meth, right, or drugs, or highly likely to get killed, right? Places where the infant mortality rate is very low, and places where the infant mortality rate is very high, unfortunately, right? And so hip hop is like that. And so people sometimes think hip hop is all like one neighborhood with all the same characteristics with everybody, but it's incredibly diverse. So there are MCs that take someone like 2 Chainz or Young Thug, or you could take someone like Migos and Lil Yachty, and they have songs that fixate on the joys of selling crack. And they talk about how much they love selling crack, how they love taking your BITCH, how they love, killing ninjas, but not ninjas. And this is this is like the bulk of the themes of what they talk about. Mm-hmm. And so you could say that they essentially have anti-Black music, right? And they have this sort of anti-Black music. They're very popular, and they universally call women B's and H's. And so this is one type of hip hop. And then you can listen to someone again like J. Cole. You can listen to someone like Kendrick Lamar, or you can listen to someone like Big Sean, or someone like Drake, or Chance, and hear, or Rhapsody, right, and hear a whole bunch of other things, right? Something not as fixated on death, suffering, and exploitation of Black people. Mm-hmm. And this is what I think is often lost in our conversation. So you might say they have hot beats all the way around, but the hot beats are often coupled with toxic lyrics at times. And those toxic lyrics, are more palatable for some people than others. And some people don't mind hearing, a string of lyrics about celebrating death and misery in the Black community. But other people want to hear something more. And people who defend a lot of the lyrics, certainly about the joys and wonders and pleasures of selling crack, will say, "Oh, I'm just rapping about what I see." But you and I are old enough to remember when people talked about it in KRS One's "Love's Gonna Get You," right? Where KRS One had a whole song about selling crack, but it was a cautionary tale. It was a tale about what one, how poverty was an incentive for him to sell illicit drugs, but also what it did to destabilize his family, his friends,
Yes.
his own life, ultimately leading to death and prison. Ice Cube has probably over a dozen songs saying the exact same thing, where it is a tale of this cautionary tale about all the deleterious consequences of engaging in illicit drug trade. Most of these songs we hear today, they're just how great it is to sell crack, full stop. So if you listen to the Ghetto Boys song back in the day, my mind playing tricks on me, it's a song where you have two drug dealers telling stories and the song and verses, but it's unquestionably a song about how terrible this whole thing is. It's not a glorified narrative of the wonders of drugs. So you can talk about what's going on in the community without glorifying it, promoting it, and saying it's so wonderful that we are out there, causing life to be miserable for Black people.
Right. Right. Well, that's really interesting when you talk about it in that regard, because there are so many lessons that can be learned from being a part of the musical scene or listening to that. I know that there are people who are turned away from it because of just what you just talked about, that they see the negativity and and they feel like it's bringing the community down. Um, but hip hop has actually created some of our strongest, um, I guess, cultural icons or figures in the community. You look at now people like Jay-Z and Master P and all these other folks who have created definite empires um, based on the musical genre.
Yeah. So there's so much. So I think it's okay for people to be openly critical of hip hop, right? And I'm open. Anyone who knows me and you see me giving a talk somewhere, I'm openly critical of some elements of hip hop. And I think it's good to say there are clowns in hip hop and there are people who have anti-black messages in hip hop, and that's okay. I'm fine with it, right? I
Right.
also know that hip hop, like I said before, it's like I live in Hartford, right? And I know that all of Hartford is not like the West End, right? And I know that there are conditions that, and maybe it's not always a good analogy because you're looking at forces that kind of beyond people's control oftentimes. But when you think about hip hop, there are people like in any industry, whether we're talking about sports, government, education, you name it. No one's pure, right? We all have our shortcomings. We have our histories. We have our foibles. And, with all of our imperfections, there's so much to admire about someone like Jay-Z. Like Jay-Z is a very flawed person. But Jay-Z is someone who has had a really fascinating arc in his life. Like he's matured in uncertain in very clear ways. Like you look at him from Reasonable Doubt in '96, you look at him as a billionaire. And from my measure, he's the very first musician to become a billionaire. And this is something I haven't heard people talk about. But I've Googled it, I've researched, and Bono is worth upward over $700 million. Paul McCartney might have been worth over $1 billion if he didn't get divorced and lose hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mhm.
Michael Jackson was in incredible debt of hundreds of millions of dollars, and he was not worth $1 billion. Prince was never worth $1 billion. And Madonna is worth probably 800 million, I think, in my last look. But Jay-Z is the very first person in the history of music to be worth in excess of $1 billion. And there's a guy who was raised. I mean, he had every single obstacle against him. He was raised
Yeah.
in Brooklyn, New York, born in 1969. Only a year after it was absolutely legal to discriminate against Black people for buying a home in a white community. So federal, state, and local laws that codified these sorts of practices. But
Right.
here's a Black boy raised in Marcy Projects in Brooklyn in the most violent period of this city's history, that under all those conditions, with everything stacked against him, he eventually has a business acumen, the brilliance to navigate a very, very treacherous world of corporate America to establish himself as the first billionaire in the history of music, right? To be an artist. That's remarkable. And I think a lot of times people look at hip hop and just like they were unwilling to see genius in the creation of the four elements, because this is not what people expect genius to look like.
Right.
We can't deny the fact that the businessmen in hip hop have been extraordinary in terms of what they've been able to do. And
Right.
I could go this whole list of people, but even when you think about people outside just straight business, you can think of people like Will Smith and Queen Latifah and LL Cool J, who, among many, who become bona fide actors and have
Right.
created their own business portfolios along those
Well,
lines
that
as
goes
well.
back to tell you too that that's a part of who a creative person is in the first place. So you can't try to lock them down into being just this rap artist, but part of creativity is being able to look at all of that and take your gifts and move it to any realm, you know. And so I applaud them, you know, for the work that they've been able to do to kind of break the mold, so to speak, of kind of being the one trick pony type of a situation, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's very true. Yeah.
So anyway, you enlightened me even more again about this gift that you have in terms of understanding the historical. I mean, you kind of flowed that today, just like a lyric, just like you were rapping. So that's your rap, right? And part of your history as a professor, what you bring to the table. And so I appreciate you coming on today and kind of sharing that gift, because I think that it's important that we kind of know that. There's so much, it's so multifaceted. I mean, there's so many things I could talk to you about that I haven't gotten to, that we could talk about hip hop and rap culture, from the way that they dress to the way that they have the dancers on the side, and like you said, how they treat women and those and all those things that come out of it, is you know why people need to read your book and know about other things that come up with hip hop and the history of what's going on in rap world.
Well,
You were
well,
going to
thank you
say
for having me. It's an absolute pleasure, Dr. B. And so it's really
it's
really
on
good. I
you to
call you
say
Dr.
that.
B.
You can call me what you call me, man.
I'm trying to show respect, man. So,
That's
but no,
what
it's an absolute pleasure
yeah,
to be here, and thanks for having me. It's easy to talk about because it is, as you can tell, it's a passion of mine, and
definitely.
I do thank God to have something that you really that you enjoy and you would do if you could just do for free, you would do it. And so, it doesn't take much to get me to want to talk about this. So
I appreciate you. You know, you know, I think we have the opportunity to be Black men in a field that still needs us, still needs to build upon who we are. I know in my discipline of counselor education, it's a necessity that we bring more Black men into the fold. I'm proud of you and what you've done and what you've accomplished. You're hanging out in my UConn, my alma mater, and doing great things there. I follow you a lot in terms of the things that you're doing, and I just appreciate you for everything that you do. I'm glad that you accepted my offer to be a part of this podcast today. I'm going to put it out there wide and let people know what Dr. Ogbar is really bringing to the table when it comes to history. And you know your stuff, and I appreciate it. So,
well, thank you, and you keep up the work too. I mean, I'm amazed at what you've done as well, and I've got a chance to see your career like in different parts of the country. Seeing you move
yeah.
and one university's lost is another university's gain when it came to you, and so your light has shined, all over the place, and so thanks for that as well. Really
Well, I
appreciate it.
appreciate that. You know, you have so many mentors in your life when it comes to this. You came into my life at a time where I needed to see you because I wasn't seeing you at UCF, UConn. You were, and there weren't a lot of Black professors that I could kind of look up to. And then you coming in as a young brother, um, 2 years before I got my degree, says a lot because, we got to know one another and hang out. You became the workout king at UCF. I keep saying UCF. I'm so used to saying UCF,
Yeah,
but at
no, I get it.
UConn, you were the man, and I'm glad that you're holding down the charge there. You've done great things, from being the vice provost there and all that. We haven't got a chance to talk about that, but your career has blossomed as well, and I see that cast book up there on your shelf.
Oh
Did you
yeah,
find
yeah.
that picture? Did you find that picture?
You know what? I did not. I'm sure it's here somewhere. I'm surprised I have
All
two
right, so
pictures of the
we'll have to
cover
maybe
now.
attach it. We'll find a way to attach it to the podcast.
Yeah.
But I thank you again for being here today. I we're trying this month to just do as much as we can about Black history, and so you coming on and being here is very, very phenomenal. I'm touched. I'm empowered by what you brought. I will let people know that on this Friday, we're bringing in Dr. Rashana Chappell, who is a UCF professor in sociology, social work, and she's going to talk about the deaf culture as well as what it's like to be a Black female in the consulate, in the, I guess, the professorate or the academia, or however you want to call that. So she's in social work. And so I'm looking forward to her being here. But again, man, I'm gonna have to bring you back because you got much more to talk about other than just hip hop. But I appreciate you, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. You have a good one. All right.
Well, and thank you to the UCF Foundation for being a part of helping us get this podcast off the ground. And we'll see you on Friday with Dr. Chappell.